Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and welcome to the episode of Cheap Shots, the ultimate series for miniature wargamers who want stunning tabletop quality miniatures without breaking the bank. In this series, we'll show you how to save money on your miniatures painting hobby by using affordable craft paints, budget-friendly tools, and clever techniques. So whether you're a beginner or a seasoned hobbyist, you'll learn how to achieve incredible results without the premium price tag. And on today's video, we're going to show you guys how to paint up a regiment of Phoenix Guard for your High Elf Realms armies for games of Warhammer the Old World. And by following the tips, techniques, as well as materials that we suggest for this list, we can help you save $195.37 to bring your miniatures to a beautiful tabletop standard at a less than premium price tag by using those cheaper craft paints. So as you can see in this photo, this is the end result of what our regiment is going to look like. If you were to purchase everything from our cheapskate method for the very first time, we're just going with that assumption, talking about a grand total investment of $38.92 as opposed to Citadel as well as Army Painter's total of $234.29. So that being said, let's go ahead and talk about exactly how to quickly and more importantly cheaply paint up your regiments of Phoenix Guard for your High Elf Realms armies. Alright, so first thing I do of course is to assemble your miniatures. As you can see, I've put these guys together and I put them on their larger 25mm bases, and the reason why is because putting these guys on their old 20mm bases used to be a major pain back in the day during the Warhammer 8th edition phase. I'm kind of glad they do have the larger 25mm bases for these Phoenix Guard because they do have a pretty broad stance, plus they got these really big bellowing cloaks and these halberds fit at weird angles. So once you have your miniatures fully assembled, the next thing we gotta do of course is to texture miniatures. So to do texturing for my miniatures, I like to use wood glue as well as sand in order to texture the miniatures, and the reason why is because it's cheap, it's affordable, I can get sand from my backyard, and I have wood glue kind of sitting around in my garage. So all I do is I paint the miniatures bases with wood glue for the parts that's going to have texturing on it, and then from there I just take sand from my backyard and dust it real quick and let it dry. So that way it has this kind of granulated, kind of organic look because I'm using real sand to base my miniatures. Now to make sure that the texturing doesn't come flaking off the miniature, what I decided to do is put a sealant on it. What I do is I make a 50-50 mixture of both water as well as wood glue to add as like a slurry, and then I apply it like a wash all over the texturing of the bases and I let it sit and dry. That way what it does, it creates an airtight seal, so that way the texturing doesn't come flaking off the bases. And the last step of our prep stage for our miniatures before we start painting is we're going to magnetize these bases real quick so that way they can stay on the moving tray and not worry about falling off too easily. Now a lot of people like to use things like strip steel. People also like to use litho, like rare magnets, all kinds of different things in order to keep their miniatures magnetized. However, I prefer to use cheap vent cover magnets. You can get these at your local hardware stores like Lowe's or Home Depot, for example. They're large rectangular sheet magnets that actually are supposed to go on top of vents, so that way you can focus where your air conditioning goes inside your house. You get a pack of 3 of these things for like $5. They're absolutely fantastic. You can cut with a pair of scissors, and as you can see, this is exactly what I did. I just made one giant sheet magnet to represent the bases that's going to go inside the movement tray. I then cut out 25mm squares for all the bases, and I just super glue them directly to the bases directly. And if there's any parts that are hanging over, as you can see in the side image there on my right hand side of the screen, if there's any excess, you just trim it with a pair of scissors real fast, and then we move on. So now that we're done with all the prep work, the first thing we gotta do of course is to prime our miniatures. Now when it comes to priming is an important step because it allows for a surface for your acrylic paints to adhere to on your miniatures. Unfortunately, if you just put your acrylic paint directly onto bare plastic, the slightest bit of friction would cause the paint to rub off, which will of course destroy the overall finish of your miniature. So that's what priming comes into effect, because it adds a really good texturing surface for your acrylic paints to adhere to. The second thing that priming also does too is it has a large impact on the value of the colors, so the vibrancy of the colors to use on your miniatures. Usually speaking, the more subdued or the darker the paint scheme, you want to go with a darker primer, and the more vibrant the paint scheme, you want to go with a lighter primer. So in this case, I like to use Rust-Oleum flat white primer. You can get it at your local Walmart for cheap. I just do a quick dusting all over the entirety of the miniatures with the Rust-Oleum flat white primer, and ready to start working on our very first layer of base coats. So the very first detail we're going to work on is actually on the banner. And the reason why is because the banner has this really beautiful bas-relief type sculpture directly onto the flag itself. And the reason why I start with the banner first, it may seem kind of counterproductive, but the reason why I do this is so that way I don't really rush this step when I'm painting up my miniatures. Traditionally speaking, a lot of people like to work on the banners last, but I work on it first, that way I can pay a lot of attention to this detail and take care of it. So in order to create the background, which you have this flying phoenix rising out of the flames with this sky background. So to paint up that sky background, I use Mystique Turquoise by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Walmart. I just put 2 thin layers directly on the sky. That is the background of this banner, and ready to move on for dry brushing. So after we get over the base coat, we're going to dry brush the background of this banner by using Dutch Aqua by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Walmart as well. Dry brushing is an important step in miniatures painting because it creates the illusion of depth on your miniatures. What it does is that the pigments of the paint adhere to the base surface of the miniature while leaving those darker colors in the recess, giving you the idea of highlighting as well as depth. So let's do a quick dry brushing directly onto the back of the banner there to kind of bring out a lot of those details like the fold and the fabric, and also bring out some of the details like the little stars that are in the constellations behind the phoenix as well. And the more important thing to remember when it comes to dry brushing, of course, is to do it in successive layers of brightness. So start with a really light dry brush and then build up layers as you want it to get brighter, because it's very easy to add more dry brushing, but it's very difficult to take off. And of course, the side effect is going to be that it's going to have this chalky kind of pastel appearance, but don't worry, when we do the oil washing stage toward the end of the painting process, it will smooth out those transitions. So the next detail we're going to pick out real quick are the little stars on the background of the banner. I do apologize that my picture is kind of blurry on this one, but for this one I use Deco Arts Emperor's Gold. You get this at your local Walmart for about 99 cents. It's a extremely beautiful, cheap alternative to Retributor armor. It pretty much has the same kind of principles on it. So I just put little dots of paint directly on the stars at the back on the Phoenix, and ready to move on to our next detail. So the next detail we're going to actually work on is the actual phoenix of the banner. To bring out that detail, we're going to use 2 thin coats of Anniversary Silver by Folk Art. It's a beautiful bright silver color that also has a little bit of a tinge of blue on it. And the reason why I did that because it contrasts nicely with the rest of the background. At the same time, it's also to contrast really well with the rest of the color scheme to be used for the flames on this banner. And speaking of the flames, the very first thing we're doing is we're start picking out some of those details. So we're going to actually pick out the coals on the very bottom of the banner, as well as the flames on the wings of the phoenix as well. We're going to use 2 thin coats of King's Gold by Apple Paint. You get this at your local Walmart. It's a nice, beautiful, kind of medium dark yellow color. We're just going to use that to bring out those details real quickly and just put 2 thin coats directly on it. And then from there, we're actually going to pick out the actual massive flame that makes up most of the banner. We're going to use 2 thin coats of Ripe Tomato by Apple Barrel Paint. Once again, this is a color you can get at your local Walmart. We're just going to make sure that we get a nice, good, solid base coat directly onto the flames as well. So that way we have that nice little contrast between the yellow flames of the Phoenix as well as the major flames of the banner itself. Now, the next step, of course, is to pick out the actual Assyrian temple on the base of the banner, as well as the actual coals of that fire as well. And to bring out that effect, we're going to use 2 thin layers of pigment paint by Apple Barrel Paint. We're just going to use this directly onto the flame icon as well as the temple icon in the middle of the banner, and then we're just going to put little dots of the pigment paint directly on the individual coals, so that way they look like they're kind of glowing yellow from the heat of the flame that they're resting on. And to add additional highlight directly to the flames of it, we're also going to dry brush the flames as well as the coals with some canary yellow. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 58 cents. We're just going to do a quick dry brush directly all over it, just to make sure that those flame effects have an additional highlight directly added to it. And then we're also going to neaten up that little temple symbol with a little flame in the center by just reapplying another coat of pigment paint on top of that in order to bring out that nice detail. And that pretty much is going to do all the work we're going to have for the bas relief on the banner of the Phoenix Guard Regiment. So now that we're done with the banner, the first thing I do, of course, is to base coat our miniatures with their flesh. Now, luckily for us, the only flesh that's exposed on these Phoenix Guard are their faces. So we use 2 thin coats of flesh by Apple Barrel Paint to apply it directly onto their faces. Now, we don't need to be particularly neat at this point. Just want to make sure you got a good solid base coat as well. Now, I will warn you that some of these guys, the back of their necks are also exposed. So if you find the nape of their neck, you also apply 2 thin coats of that flesh paint directly onto that detail. From there, we're going to dry brush the flesh that we did earlier with some Delta Cerancoat Peaches and Cream, which is a nice pale flesh color. We're just going to dry brush directly onto their faces. So that way it brings up the details like the brow ridges as well as their noses and other highlighting areas on that flesh. And as I was working on my miniatures, I realized I didn't finish most of the banner like I originally wanted to, so I decided to go back with some Deco Arts Emperor's Gold. I decided to paint the edge of the banner as well with 2 thin coats of that gold color, just to kind of give that distinctive outline for the actual illustration and illumination on that banner. So the next detail we're going to work on these miniatures are on the white aspects of their clothing. Now for the Phoenix Guard, the only clothing that's really shown that's going to be white are the sleeves of their tunics, as well as a little gap between their chainmail halberds they're actually wearing as well. So like right between their legs, as well as a small little section of the sleeve that's exposed. Now painting white is usually a very difficult color to paint on miniatures. That's because white is a very transparent color, so that way you can really see a lot of the mistakes that you have. So to solve this problem, my recommendation to you is use a very opaque color like Folk Arts Pale Gray, and put that as a base coat directly on all that white, so that way it hides away any errors and makes a good solid base coat for the white paint on top of that. So we're going to put 2 thin coats of Pale Gray on all the parts we want to be white on these miniatures. And once we have that base coat down, we're going to put 2 thin base coats of white by Apple Barrel paint as well, and we're going to put it directly on the pale gray that we did earlier. And as you can see in this photo, the white is actually very vibrant and actually sticking out on its own, as opposed in contrast to the primer that we put on these miniatures earlier. And that's the reason why we did 2 thin base coats of pale gray first, so that when we add that white on top of it, it just makes it even brighter and more vibrant, and also makes it eye-catching as well. And then once we're done with that undercoating, the next thing we gotta do now is start working on the armor. So for the chainmail that these characters are wearing, or specifically the scale mail that these guys are wearing, we decided to use 2 thin coats of Folk Arts Copper. You can get that at your local Walmart. It's a beautiful, rich copper color. And I decided to put it for both the scale mail coats they're wearing, as well as for the helmets as well. And the reason why is because there's a lot of silver and gold in High Elf armies, and I was feeling that this is kind of a drab look, because yes, while all the silver and gold and white is quite good, you do want to create some color variety in your miniatures. And I'm a fan of bright, cold, bold colors, and I thought by giving these guys copper armor, what it does, it makes them look more like a reddish hue in their armor, and reddish hue with their overall color scheme, which kind of adds the fact that these guys are protecting and guarding a fire, the sacred fires of Azure, at all times. So I wanted to kind of create that kind of fiery look with these characters. So because I put 2 thin coats on things like the sleeves of the scale mail coats, as well as the lower part of their extremities, as well as their helmets as well. And the next detail we're going to work on are on their cloaks. Specifically, we're going to look on the interior of their cloaks. We're not going to worry about the exterior yet, because there are some engraved flames on the back of their cloaks. What we're doing is we're getting for the recesses of the inside of the cloaks. That way it can take care of that detail, not really interfere with the other details. Now for that color, we're going to use Mystic Turquoise by Folk Art. We use this color for a couple of reasons. One, it's a nice contrasting color to the copper armor that we have for these characters, and at the same time it also matches the banner as well. So we put 2 thin coats on the inner lining of the cloaks, that way we can break out that detail and ready to move on to our next step. And that next detail is typically the most frustrating detail of all when it comes to High Elf miniatures, which is that thin rim of color that usually goes on the outside of their armor. Anybody who's ever painted High Elves before knows exactly what I'm talking about. It is a very thin layer that you got to be very exacting with on these miniatures. It's a very frustrating detail to paint, because if you spill over any of the white that you have on your miniature, you got to go back and neaten that up. If it gets on any of the armor, you got to go back and neaten that up as well. So if you struggle with line work, it is a major pain in order to bring out that detail. With that being said though, when it's executed properly on the miniature, it absolutely looks stunning. So in order to bring out that detail, we're going to use green turquoise by Apple Barrel paint. We're going to use this on the thin rim of the outside of the chainmail coats, as well as their sleeves. We're also going to use this on some of the tassels hanging off of the banner as well. We're just going to put 2 thin coats of this directly onto that color. Now if you do make any mistakes, like I mentioned before, all you gotta do is neaten it up again. For the white, all you gotta do is just put a single layer of pale gray on any parts you made a mistake, and then follow through with some white. And of course, if anything lands on the copper colored armor, you just use Folk Arts Copper and neat that up as well. And as you can see, it's a nice contrasting color to the copper. It also complements the turquoise that we use in their cloaks, and kind of gives them this kind of like filigree look to their armor as well. Now before we move on to any of the larger details, we're going to work on some of the fine details, especially for the musician, which is a drummer in this case. So in order to actually paint the part of the top of the drum, we're going to use 2 thin coats of khaki paint by Apple Barrel paint, and once that's dry, we're ready to move on to our next major detail. And that major detail are the shafts of their halberds, as well as the drumsticks of the character, as well as some of the leather harnessing for some of the guys that have scabbards, as well as for the leather harnessing for the drummer themselves, and as well as the shaft of the standard bearer as well. So to break out that detail, we're going to use 2 thin layers of payment paint, which is a very dark gray color, almost black. We're going to use this one to bring out that detail because it contrasts nicely with the rest of the miniatures. We're going to further accentuate the details of the pavement paint that we did earlier by dry brushing with some pale gray real fast, so that way it has a nice kind of weathered look, and at the same time brings a lot of the highlighting on those black details. Now the next major detail we're going to work on are on the flames that are bordering the bottom of the cloaks of the high elves. They got these kind of writhing flame designs on the edges of their cloaks, and for those of you who struggle with line work like I do, especially these kind of fine details, we're going to actually kind of find a workaround around this to make it a little bit easier for us. So the first thing we're going to do real fast is we're going to try to do our best or bring out those details by using 2 thin coats of ripe tomato in order to bring out those details, so that way we can just put that directly on the rim of the cloaks. Because the next thing that's going to be really difficult, of course, is filling out the negative space between the flames. But I got a neat little trick that's going to help us out with that. And the way we're going to do that is through dry brushing as well as glazing. So we're going to dry brush all the flames that we did earlier at the base of the cloaks with some Canary Yellow by Appleboro paint. Once again, the same paint you can get at your local Walmart as well. We're just going to put a light dry brushing directly on the flames. And if you'll notice, I'm also going a little past the flames as well, because what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a little boundary of yellow around the flames that we can just, kind of pick at with some turquoise and not exactly fill in completely to make it look like the flames are glowing on the cloaks. And we're going to achieve this look by using glazing. What you do with glazing is that you actually mix your acrylic paints with some water, about a 50-50 mixture, till it's almost like a wash, and you're going to apply it like a wash directly on the flames, as well as the dry brushing that we did earlier, working our way up in kind of like a spiky kind of formation, as you can see in this photo here. And we're going to do that. Now the glazing process is a little time consuming. It takes about 3 to 4 coats on your miniatures, so what you have to do is you have to apply it like a wash, let it dry completely, and then add another layer, let it dry completely, and you repeat until you bring it to the desired effect that you want to have. And the reason why we're doing this is because painting those negative spaces between the flames with turquoise is going to be extremely painful. So in order to solve that problem, we're just going to use this this King's Gold wash in order to apply that directly onto the flames. That way it's easier to paint with turquoise later on. So while that glaze is drying, we decided to go back and decided to paint up the armor, which is like the chainmail breastplates these characters are wearing, as well as their gloves, their boots, as well as the blades of their halberds. And to bring out those details, we're going back to Anniversary Silver, which is a bright silver color that has almost kind of like a blue tinge to it. And we're going to add that to make these guys look like their armor is kind of otherworldly. Now there's a lot of the silver directly on these miniatures. The blades, for example, the chest plates, the gauntlets, as well as the drums. We're also going to paint up any boots that they have exposed as well. We're going to put 2 thin layers on that, and then we're going to go back directly to the cloaks to finish them off. So next we're going to go back to the cloaks, and we're going to apply 2 thin coats of Mystic Turquoise on the outside of the cloaks that we did earlier. As you can see, I kind of did like an uneven paint job, kind of poking directly into the yellow that we did earlier, but adding multiple coats to it. Now granted, it's not as fine detail as normal like heavy metal painters would paint, because they actually paint and color the individual spaces between the flames, but I am not a professional painter in any way. I'm definitely an amateur. I just do this as a hobbyist. So if you struggle with those flame designs, this is kind of like a neat little trick that you could use in order to kind of circumvent that and actually have a really easier time of actually bringing out those details on your miniatures. And the last thing we do with those cloaks real quick is once again do a Dutch Aqua dry brush directly onto the cloaks, but we're not going to touch that Dutch Aqua with the bottom of the cloaks where the flames are. We're just only going to concentrate on the details above it as well, so like the shoulders as well as the middle back, so that we can see those folds of the fabric and see that texturing. The next major detail we're going to go back is some of the ribbons that are hanging off the halberds that these characters are carrying. So to bring out that detail, we're going to use Dutch Aqua in order to bring up that detail real quick. So we're just going to put 2 thin coats of that for some of the ribbons hanging off of the halberds these characters are holding. And we're going to pick out our very last bit of metallic elements on these miniatures by using Pure Gold by Folk Art. Now Pure Gold is not as dark or vibrant as Deco Art's Emperor's Gold. It's more of like a paler gold color, and the reason why I'm using this is that way this color contrasts nicely with the copper armor that these characters are wearing, as well as the feathers of their armor as well. The things that we're focusing on, for example, are like the pauldrons, not the pauldrons, on the thigh plates that are protecting their thighs, which looks like little wings. We're also painting the feathers of their armor as well, and that 2 thin coats of gold. We're also going to use it directly on some like the gem inlays on the banner, as well as the flaming phoenix icon on the top of the banner as well. Things like the bottom of the drum, for example, the butt spikes of some of the halberds. So whatever details you want to be, the sheaths, that's right, not the sheaths, the hilt of the swords and the handles of the swords for those who have sheathed swords on their side as well. So whatever details you want to be brought up in gold, some of like the emblems on their chests, for example, you just put 2 thin coats of pure gold directly on top of it. And to further accentuate the gold details that we did earlier in pure gold, what we're going to do is we're going to dry brush them real quick with some anniversary silver to make it more of a shiny, kind of lustrous looking idea. So you can see the feathers, you can see the texturing of the feathers really well as the thigh plates that are protecting their thighs. Same thing with the little Azurian phoenix on the icon on the very top of the banner. Just do a quick dry brush of that real quick, and we're going to move on to our next detail. So next thing we're going to pick out real quick are the gemstones on the foreheads of the helmet. We're going to use Bimini Blue by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get it at your local Walmart for about 58 cents. We're going to put 2 thin dots of this Bimini Blue directly onto the little gemstones on their foreheads, as well as on the gemstones of their belts and cummerbunds on their armor as well. The reason why is because it is slightly brighter than the turquoise paints we've been using earlier, so that way it brings out the eye and actually brings out that detail, which contrasts nicely with all the gold and copper on these miniatures. As for the gemstones directly on the banner, we're just going to pick that 2 thin layers of Anita's True Red. You can get it at your local Hobby Lobby. We're just going to put 2 thin dots on each of those gemstones on the banner to kind of make that contrast a little more with the details that we already have on it. So with that last detail finished, the last thing we're going to do now is an oil wash. Now when it comes to the oil wash, I like to use Minwax polyacrylic and mission oak. However, we're going to change it just a little bit, and the reason why is because the mission oak color is a little too dark to put on high elf miniatures. High elf miniatures are not dirty and grimy, they're actually very bright and clean, but we want to put the oil wash on it in order to accentuate the details on our miniature, but we don't want to darken them to the point where they look grimy and dirty. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to make a quick little mixture real fast. We're going to do a mixture of 1 part oil wash. So we're going to take some Minwax polyacrylic, put 1 part of that. We're going to put 2 parts matte medium, which you can get at your local Hobby Lobby or Walmart. Ours costs about $5 for this half-liter bottle. It's very cheap stuff. The problem though is that matte medium can actually be quite thick. The oil wash will actually make it a little bit more liquidy, but the matte medium is quite viscous. So to thin that out a little more, we're going to use some jet dry, which is basically rinse aid. A lot of people like to use airbrush cleaner in order to do this as well. That's perfectly fine, but jet dry is cheap. You can get it at your local grocery store for a couple of bucks. So we're going to do 1 part Minwax polyacrylic, 2 parts matte medium, and then 2 parts jet dry, or make that into a mixture. The matte medium will thin out the polyacrylic and mission oak to make it so it's not as dark, and the jet dry will also help it to flow better as well. And they're going to put this all over the entirety of the miniature in order to make our wash. As you can see, it does achieve the same effects as Minwax polyacrylic usually does on our channel. It seeps into the recesses, it brings a lot of those details out, it smooths out the transitions between our dry brushes as well as our base coats, and it also darkened down the value of our color. But if you see there on the white, for example, it doesn't actually darken it too badly. It actually makes it more like a kind of like a very subtle kind of coloring to the armor as well. And that's exactly the effect that we wanted for our high elf miniatures. Now you will need to let this stuff dry and cure for about 24 hours, so I suggest you use this as the very last step of your painting process. That way you can go back to the next day and you can carry on as well. And at the same time, this is actually a much cheaper version than actually using Army Painter Soft Tone or Army Painter Strong Tone, because that stuff costs $30+ a can, whereas Minwax Poly Shade costs $6.99, matte medium maybe costs like $5, and then jet dry maybe like $1 or $2. So we let our stuff dry and cure, and the nice thing about this is that we don't need to worry about putting a matte varnish on these miniatures, because already the matte medium will take care of that for us. And as you can see, this stuff is dried and cured, brings a lot of those details, but doesn't darken down our miniatures nearly enough. Now what we got to do now is, of course, is work on the bases, and for the bases we're going to use 2 thin coats of English Ivy Green that you can get at your local Walmart for Apple Barrel Paint. We're just going to put 2 thin coats directly on the texturing that we have earlier on the bases. We're then going to dry brush the bases with some lime sherbet, which also costs about 58 cents at your local Walmart. You can get this stuff pretty cheap. We're just going to do a quick dry brushing directly on the bases to bring out that texturing to make it look like it's grass. And to reduce down the vibrancy of the dry brushing they did earlier, we're We're actually going to wash the miniatures with some English ivy green with a 50-50 mixture of paint as well as water to make it more like an English ivy green kind of wash, and applies directly onto the bases. That way it smooths out the transition between the texturing as well as the highlight that we have on the bases. And the very last step, of course, is to rim the bases. We're going to rim this in 2 thin coats of palm leaf green by Apple paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 58 cents. We're just with 2 thin layers around the rim of the bases, and as you can see, the miniature looks absolutely fantastic with that kind of classic heavy metals 90s look for the miniature as well. And there you guys have it. This is the end result of our Phoenix Guard. As you can see, we have a beautiful tabletop finish on our miniatures, and it only costs us a minimal cost of about $38 as well as 92 cents. And that's assuming, of course, you're purchasing everything that we recommend for the very first time from like Walmart as well as your grocery stores as well as from your hardware stores as well. So now that we're going to talk about our cheapskate method and how we went about making these miniatures using that cheapskate method, let's talk about the materials that you need to buy from both Army Painter as well as from Citadel if you want to achieve the exact same results we did by using the name brand products instead. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about the materials that you need to buy from both Citadel as well as Army Painter if you want to achieve the exact same results we did but using those name brand paints instead. You need to buy a can of Corax white spray, which would cost you $24, as well as pots of Valroth blue, Hexos pale sun, Averland Sunset, Militarum Green, Vulcan Green, White Scar, Cyberite Green, Cadian Flesh Tone, Morghast Bone, Eshin Gray, Troll Slayer Orange, Flayed One Flesh, Mephiston Red, Ulthuan Gray, and all those colors would cost you $4.55 a piece. You also need to buy a pot of Pterodon Turquoise, Retributor Armor, Screaming Bell, Ironbreaker, Aethermatic Blue, Croxagore Blue, as well as Retributor Armor, and all those other colors would cost you $7.80 for those. You also need to buy a can of Army Painter Strong Tone for $32, as well as Munitorium Varnish for $24 as well. You also need to buy an Army Painter basing set to put the texturing on the bases for $18.99. You also need to get some Citadel PVA glue for $12.50 in order to protect the texturing on your bases. And if you want to magnetize your bases, you need to buy a package of Litgo Games magnetic base bottoms. You get a pack of 25 of those, 25mm, you get 50 of those for $4.50 as well. So assuming that you're purchasing everything from these name brand products instead, you're talking about a grand total investment of $234.29. And when you subtract the cheapskate method of $38.92, you have the grand total savings of $195.37. So in conclusion, if you're looking for a way to save money on the miniatures wargaming hobby, may I suggest switching to cheaper craft paints. After all, you can achieve the similar results at a fraction of the cost. You can use that money to save, or you can use it to buy other miniatures. It's entirely up to you. So as you guys can see, if you guys have any other cheapskate methods that you guys recommend for your miniature painting, please put it down in the comments below, because I'd love to hear about new tips and techniques that you people are using out there in order to achieve the tabletop quality on the miniatures as well. So that's good for those, you guys. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. You guys' input is valuable to us as always. I am Commander Cheapskate. I will catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.